Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 9 of the Current Review podcast. Today, we have on a special guest. His name is James Carter. And if you're on LinkedIn in the EV space, you've probably seen his post because you have, 80,000 followers now. Is that correct?
That
Okay. You've got a few people who are interested in your stuff. So that's really awesome. And James Carter is the principal consultant at Vision Mobility, where you focus on automotive startup assistance, business forecasting, and overall strategy with automotive ventures. And you've previously worked in product planning at Toyota, and you're currently based in Toronto. So you focus more on the Canadian market or the US, because I feel like with a lot of stuff happening, US, a lot going on everywhere.
Oh, that's right. Well, firstly, thanks for having me, Andrew and David. Really appreciate being here today. But yeah, to answer your question, a lot of what happens in Canada crosses over to the US and vice versa. Pricing's a little bit different. The model's positioned is a little bit different. Content's a little bit different, but by and large, it's not dissimilar. And frankly, a lot of what impacts is similar, really worldwide. But particularly Canada and US do have a lot of similarities.
Definitely. And so I guess we could first just kind of go right into tariffs because Canada recently implemented some tariffs on Chinese cars. And I'm honestly not too familiar with the entire situation, but are they basically following Biden's lead of putting 100% tariff on Chinese imported cars?
Much that was the idea. There was a couple of reasons why they chose that. One was to follow what the US has done and to keep some consistency between the two countries. And I think certainly Biden and have certainly seen consistency between the two countries as important. I don't think it's a particularly good idea of imposing such tariffs like that because it simply makes far too much room for industry to be, whether it's in Canada or the US, to be uncompetitive. And that's not a good thing. That's bad for consumers. That's bad for their competitiveness. Unless it's time regulated or time done over time, it's just not going to work. And buy uncompetitive cars, not me.
Yeah, well, that's a super interesting thing about this whole scenario. Because I want to get your take on the Canadian market a little bit better. Because I would assume you definitely know that way better than we do. But I guess the interesting thing is at least in America, there's definitely more. I sense a lot of nationalism with US brands because there's Ford, GM, Chevy, just all these companies that people are because you got a big group of people that only drive Rams, Ford pickup trucks, etc. And at least in Canada, I mean, there's some Stellantis factories in, I believe, around Windsor, Canada. Is that correct? And so, how do you feel the Canadian market will treat Chinese cars? Do you think they'll be more likely to embrace them versus the US?
A couple of things. Firstly, so if you look at Ontario, where almost all Canadian automotive manufacturing is, it's roughly maybe just a little bit smaller than Michigan. So the scale is pretty big. So you've got Toyota, you've got GM, you've got Ford, you've got Honda and Stellantis. So there's a lot of cars made here. Just to give you some sort of what happens here. And in fact, Windsor is the most trading or cross-border place in the world. So you can understand how much between these two countries are working together for these type of supply chains to happen. So I think that's a really important thing to understand. The second thing is, as to what you were talking about in terms of Canada be more to embrace, vehicles. I think if you look at the consumers, I think probably we don't have any native brands here, US native brands being GM, Ford, Chrysler, etc., even Tesla. But we up here don't have any. It's just simply been too small and we've simply been too close to US to have that. So I think from a brand perspective, they might be a little bit more open, but obviously those brands and branding, so including the Japanese, is very strong, just like it is in the US. Especially when you get into things like pickup trucks. That said, Canadians tend to spend less on their vehicles overall than Americans do. So there's always been a much bigger opportunity in vehicles like Corolla, like Civic, much bigger sellers as a percentage of the market here than in the US. Given that, I think there's an opportunity there.
Do you think, we talk a lot on this program or this podcast about the tariffs, exactly as you're saying, as sort of really not being good for the long term unless there's like a plan for investment for these native companies to catch up. And I do say that there's a little bit of promise. We've talked about the investment going into battery or assembly plants down south because of the Made in America push. How do you see that being impacted in Canada? And do you think there is a way where we can make these other brands competitive, right, with these types of investments? And I don't know what the future is going to be like, but I have a feeling that that's going to determine either we're going to have really, really great Chinese cars and European cars, or are we going to have solid American brands in the mix?
I think there's two things here. One is, to be competitive over the long term, you need to have a phase out of those tariffs, because otherwise, okay, I understand maybe a bit of protectionism for the short term might be beneficial because, certainly Chinese exports grew extremely quickly over the last couple of years. So yeah, that could possibly be helpful. But unless you don't have a time phase out plan, then you're going to remain uncompetitive and continue to be uncompetitive. And I think that's the real problem. I think when we're talking about, these investments that have been made both in Canada and in, up here in Ontario, there's been several big announcements for battery plants. There's Stellantis, there's Volkswagen has their power up or power on or something. Honda's announced some big battery plans. There's others as well. So understand why both the government and those companies want to protect an investment that they've made. The investment in the long term is not going to be competitive if you have an unlevel playing field. So I think that's why you need that step down. And whether it's in Canada or whether US, it's the same thing that applies. I think the interesting thing, though, with the changing government that's coming, has said open to US plants or US battery plants or vehicle plants, provided that that the Chinese come to here, make the plants here and have US jobs. And I'm sympathetic to that. I'm open to that way of thinking. So, that's already happened in Mexico. And, that's a potential possibility for Canada as well. But, I'd certainly be open to that as a little bit of protection, but keep competition happening.
And because especially with the step down period you mentioned, when I just envision that, the first thing I think of is the Inflation Reduction Act with their tax credit requirements. So basically, like early on, it was like, I forgot what exact percent it was, but it was maybe like at least 30% of the batteries materials must be sourced from United States or North American or our free trade partners. And then they keep increasing it over the years. But I think what was really interesting with this tariff that got put in place under the Biden administration on Chinese cars is it was just 100% tariff right there, right now. And for like someone like Polestar, it was like, what the heck? Because it's like they were importing their cars, I think at around 25-30% tariff before this. And now it's just like, hey, an automaker cannot react quickly enough to that
Absolutely.
change.
Yeah. And the same things happen in Canada too. In fact, interestingly enough, up until that came into effect, Teslas actually came from China, not from Fremont. So they had just a bigger impact on Canada as it did for other like Polestar as well. So there's been quite the upheaval for some, that's for sure.
Interesting. Yeah, because I always remember looking on like the Canadian Tesla configurators, you see like some different spec, because I think you guys got the LFP Model Y, maybe for like a brief period.
Yeah.
And then because we never had that in the United States. So there were some interesting vehicles that can get here. So that's really interesting. And I wonder too, like when it comes to like reselling those vehicles, if someone would sell that to someone in the United States, if they couldn't, maybe because, I don't know. So that would be kind of interesting to look into that.
I mean, cross-border sales can be a little tricky. I think cars that are originally coming to Canada are going to pretty, 99 out of 100 are probably going to stay in Canada, and the US to the same thing as well. So unless it's something specialist, it's unlikely that it's going to move.
Now, what do you think about, like, with a company like Polestar, like their future, at least in North America, when these tariffs basically, like right now, Polestar can basically only sell the Polestar 3 without paying obscene tariffs because basically like their re-strategy for people who aren't really familiar with this is since they now can't sell, or since they're now paying 100% tariff on the Polestar 2, they basically got rid of all the entry-level models. And now they're only selling the top trim performance for like 66.2, which is pretty expensive because like at that price, you can get Model Y or Model 3 performance for like 55 and the tax credit. So way more money than Model 3 performance. It's kind of priced way above the competitors and they're paying 100% tariff on these cars. So what do you think about the future of just Polestar in this space? Because it's like they're having trouble selling a car that they could already sell.
I don't, it does. I'm not sure if Polestar has an alternative plant for the 2 or not. But obviously, they'd have to do what Tesla does and bring it in from Europe or somewhere else. But we also know Polestar 3 is built in, where is it built? North Carolina?
South Carolina.
Or somewhere. So, obviously it's going to avoid that problem as well. So, there's going to be a lot more focus on that vehicle. The big problem is that vehicle is nearly $100,000. So, it's well over $100,000 here. And I don't know what, 90 there, something like that, 80, 90. So, you have that issue that there's so many vehicles you can sell at that price bracket.
Oh no, I was going to ask about that you used to work for Toyota, right? And I think they're back in like the 80s, right? There's a lot of American protectionism around Japanese cars, but I think for the most part they've made a pretty significant investment here in the US, right? And I think you were talking about being open to that for the Chinese. Do you see that as sort of being the best pathway for those types of brands to sort of awkwardly bring their technology over here? It's weird because I think a lot of the battery technology actually started out here and funded by government programs. It just never got commercialized and the Chinese kind of went with it. But they've taken it to scale, right? And they've been able to do things that we haven't because they've invested in it for a lot longer. Now we're trying to bring it back. Would you sort of say that that's kind of probably the best path forward, or are there other things that you think that might disrupt? Like I know solid state's like the golden child that everyone's reaching for, right?
Yeah, so I think just to go back to that first one about China, it's probably really their only pathway. I think it's interesting what happened in Europe with the similar discussions that they've been having. If you wind back 30 some years when both North American and European brands were trying to set themselves up with China, China came in and said, no, you're not coming in on your own. You have to partner with someone else. And by doing that, there was a lot of transfer of technology, a lot of transfer of knowledge, which eventually allowed them to build up their own industry. And I get that. That's fair enough. And that's the way it worked. And some people back in Europe said, hey, just flip it around. If you want to come here, you got to do the same. And I think actually that's not a bad strategy at all. So, because are able to share some of their technology and some of the things that they're doing very well in the greater European automotive or North American automotive, I think that's a good thing. And I think we should really highlight one important thing here. And that is they have some unique and excellent technology that's well above and beyond what both Europe and North America are doing. That is really important because I think there's people who would say, no, they just copy everything. But, in some automotive OEMs, like the leadership in both Toyota and both Ford and others, they've either gone to China or they've taken a vehicle and torn it down and went, holy crap, this is really good shit. We really need to be figuring this out. So that's really important to understand how that works as well.
Yeah, for sure. And it's like you see like the comparison of like some of these like crazy BYDs. I think it's a BYD Yangwang U8. I forgot what it is, but it's a plug-in hybrid SUV that can like drive through water for like 30 minutes at a time. And it's like,
So
you see some of this stuff and you're just like, that is just pure insanity. And you want it so bad. It's like the forbidden fruit. But I think the really interesting thing that you mentioned with these partnerships is like one of them is GM SAIC, and that's Shanghai Automotive Industry Corporation. I forgot the exact name. I probably butchered it. But basically, yeah, for GM to sell cars in China, they had to partner with SAIC, which is basically a government funded automotive manufacturer. And so it kind of spawned out all these really weird cars that you can't get in the United States. And I think probably some of this technology might be proprietary to this partnership, because you get some of these cool cars that you can't even get here. And I think one of them is like the Buick Velite, which is like this electric Buick station wagon, which is like pretty cool. And it's like, I'm not sure how well a station wagon made by Buick will do in the United States, but it's like, that would just be a cool car to have. But unfortunately not. That's part of the partnership. So I think that would be really interesting if they could do something.
for sure, they definitely have some unique and interesting stuff. But I think you did hit on something that's really, really interesting, and that's government funding, government support. And I think that's something I really want to bring up, because, you know, we've heard a lot of people say, oh, China's just throwing so much money at their industry. They're all state sponsored and it's all this and that. And someone did a calculation that's $240 billion that they've thrown over X amount of years into the industry. It sounds like a lot of money until you understand that the Inflation Reduction Act was what, 500 million plus? Obviously, 100 billion plus, I should say. But obviously not all of it went into automotive. There was a lot of money that went into clean energy and a bunch of other things, infrastructure build out, things like that. What we should is that they throw more money at their car industry than North America or US does. Because I can tell you, both Canada and the US combined throw a shitload of money at it. So, you know, we should, and even more so in Europe, or as much as, again, in Europe as well. So, you know, let's bear in mind that a lot of governments throw a lot of money at automotive. So, but continuing on, I think the Chinese government has done a very good job at backing good technologies and backing ways to improve their vehicles so that they can set themselves up for export, which they're in a position now. Of course, they did this 10 plus years ago. And one of the things they did, as you know, was brought that technology over, like from A123 Systems and others, built it and kept running with it to really make it happen. And, you know, you take BYD, for instance. BYD is really fascinating because they started out as this little battery company in Shanghai with a chemist making a few batteries for phones. And, you know, then in 2003, he bought out a tiny little car manufacturer, and they're one of the biggest companies in the world now. So really fascinating how these companies have grown up.
So do you think it's interesting that, like, you know, BYD was a cell phone battery manufacturer, right? Xiaomi was traditionally a mobile phone manufacturer. Now they make a vehicle too. But, you know, you could also make the argument that the conditions were right with the government subsidies for those companies to make that transition, which is probably the right transition because EVs are so different than traditional ICE vehicles, right? In terms of how they're built and the material and the effort that goes into it, the engineering, software and hardware integration. You know, I have a hard time seeing GM and Ford honestly making that switch because it's just so different. But then you've got new car brands like Tesla, Lucid, Rivian that I think are doing pretty well. But you're seeing that it's extremely capital intensive. It's really, really hard. I mean, it's still like I hold my breath every quarter when those companies release their quarterly reports because it's really tough to be a Western brand new car brand. But do you think that that's really like maybe the way for the West to compete is maybe to have some more of these completely tech native companies start from the ground up, or to maybe even partner with big tech? I know Apple had plans for a car, but I think it's dead now. I don't know. Yeah.
I think firstly to go on that, you know, it is really difficult to start an OEM. Just is like there's a whole bunch that have, you know, failed, you know, through various reasons. Basically, most of them didn't have enough money and spent it poorly and whatever. I mean, even Visca, who decided to go, you know, asset light and get someone else to make it, you know, suddenly found themselves struggling as well, you know, simply because they ran out of money as well. I think wise thing to decide to partner with, say, Chinese or even some, a Lucid or a Rivian or whoever to develop some of that tech. And that's exactly what we saw Volkswagen do. $5 billion in to focus on the software. And, the interesting thing about what Wagon and the Rivian partnership was not just so much about, the software that you see on, say, the infotainment, but all the rest of the software and perhaps even some of the hardware design behind what you would traditionally see. So it's a really interesting that Rivian's been able to leverage themselves and leverage their technology to support others. I not doubt that a lot of this that they've been working on will go into the Scout brand as well when Volkswagen launched that.
Yeah, I think that was a smart move. We'll see how Scout goes. It's still to be delivered, but a lot of great reviews on the prototype, at least.
Scout's fascinating because the way they got that brand, I know I'm going off on a tangent here, but it's really fascinating because what happened was that International, which had the Scout brand, was part of the Navistar group. And, you can still buy those Navistar trucks, class 6, 7 trucks. And when Traton, which Volkswagen owns, is the big truck conglomerate in Europe, bought out Navistar, suddenly the Scout brand popped up. And they went, oh, yeah, we'll take that, and made an EV brand out of it. So it was really, really quite cool what happened.
Wow. Yeah, that's going to be really exciting. Now, you went on a tangent. There was one other slight tangent I wanted to go on because you mentioned A123 systems. And I've been following like Fisker, like the original Fisker, just kind of reading more about the history of that, just because I think it's super fascinating. And it's really interesting, too, how once Fisker went bankrupt the first time, I like how we have to specify the first time, but when Fisker Automotive went bankrupt, a Chinese conglomerate called Wenshan bought out basically all the remnants, including A123 systems. And then they're making Parma Automotive, which is in Southern California. And this is kind of along the lines of those partnerships with like the United States. They didn't partner with anyone, but it is a Chinese company that owns the manufacturing plant here. Now, Parma Automotive, I'm not sure if you have any overarching thoughts on that brand. It's very interesting. And the one thing, because I remember I talked with their CEO, Marquez McCammon, who's new, he recently got in. The company only sold under 1,000 cars from like 2017 to like 2023. So there's no way that's like you're making money on that because the cars were like 130 a piece. So I don't know. I've heard they're just burning through money. Very interesting. Do you have any thoughts on them?
They're a bit of a non-entity in my mind. I have seen one. I saw one at Electrify America a few years back at their head office, but I don't really. Not really. I think that the other interesting thing about that is there's a fella by the name of Mujib Ijaz, and he was the CTO of A123 Systems who developed this when it went into the Fisker product. And when it got sold off, he went off thing for a bit. But he recently, about 3 or 4 years ago, he started a new company focused on battery called One, which is our Next Energy, based in Michigan. Yes. Yeah, so he's the same guy out of A123. And so I did have an opportunity to tour their facilities last year, which was really quite fascinating. So, and so that history is really quite interesting. So.
Yeah, no, it's just crazy, like looking back and then seeing where all the tree branches end up, because it's a very interconnected industry and
yes.
some interesting sides of the industry. And I think definitely Parma Automotive would be on the very obscure side of that.
That they have, yeah, definitely obscure.
So to kind of go, like, bring us back to, like, it seems, the car industry has been trying to innovate through investments in other vehicles, right? Or other brands and these other partnerships. Volkswagen, I think, is one of the more interesting ones right now because of the Rivian. I know they had invested in QuantumScape, right, for their solid state, and I think they stay ahead of that. The Japanese brands were betting into hydrogen. And I don't know what your thoughts are at this point in terms of, is hydrogen still a plausible future, or is it pretty much dead? Because we talked about it on this podcast before. It really, like, just like EVs, require a ton of infrastructure, but we're seeing that the charging infrastructure for battery electric vehicles is starting to find its feet. Hydrogen is pretty much dead in the water, in my opinion. Handful of stations in California, and I don't think many of them are operating anymore, even though they were government subsidized.
Let's take cars for now for hydrogen. I think we'll start with that one. Because we can go off in a lot of other areas too, and we can do that. But let's take cars. I think and some of the other Japanese brands saw hydrogen as this great alternative. And if you look at Japan as a whole, there's a lot of groupthink in there, both between the OEMs and between the government and between their kairetsu, which is their greater conglomerates that they have. A lot of groupthink around hydrogen. The problem with Japan is that it's a very energy poor country. So they're going, oh crap, our nuclear facility blew up in a tidal wave. What the hell do we do now? Oh, hydrogen. Keep you poor. So anyway, there's been a lot of groupthink. Oh, it's the greatest thing. You can fill it fast, and but drive long distances as long as you got a big enough tank. But the problem was that it was all about the infrastructure. We'll get into some of the other problems in a second, but really the core is that the infrastructure was incredibly expensive to build. And the supply chain to bring that in, because all that hydrogen has to be a truck generally from Louisiana and other parts, is like incredibly difficult. So it's difficult to bring it in. It's expensive to bring it in. These companies weren't actually really surviving selling it at $20 a kilogram. That's why they had to bunch it up to $36 a kilogram. So it's just a costly. Yes, that's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just the infrastructure. And the problem is that infrastructure too breaks down a lot, and it has to be very regularly maintained. Or infrastructure to work, every few vehicles you've got to recompress all that gas so it comes out at 700 bar, so you can actually fill the tank up. So all of this stuff breaks, and it's really bad. The other problems, if you've got a rather large efficiency problem, when it's 3x or more less efficient than an EV. The other problem that people don't really talk about much, but it's really significant, and if you've sat in a Mirai, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. There is no interior room. There's no trunk room in that car, despite it being the size of a Lexus. It's because you've got to put these round tanks somewhere, and round tanks don't package very well. So they've stuck it in the middle of this console. So that's why they've got this 3-foot wide console and this center tunnel, and it's about the size of a small hatchback. So that is a real issue. Is packaging hydrogen trucks, the vehicles, and I don't know if you saw this world record breaking hydrogen truck that I think someone did, but anyway, it took up about half of the tray space and height. It's record-breaking distance hydrogen tanks in. It's like, oh, why? This is dumb.
So I think we could say hydrogen is going to lose the battle, or the war. Yeah,
it's got to lose the battle. Common sense in terms of the cost model. There's no common sense in terms of its operational ability. So, win way it can keep going a little bit is whoever's prepared to throw money at it. So,
well, the thing I have the issue with hydrogen is just if you look at first principles engineering. So first, you need electricity to make hydrogen. That's the first thing. You need electricity or some sort of energy source. And then there's steam methane reforming. That's one process. The other process is electrolysis. In these two processes, that's a production process. Then you have the hydrogen. Then you need to store it. Then you need to put it on a truck. Then you need to drive that truck, which is probably internal combustion engine, out to a hydrogen station. And then at that hydrogen station, then it needs to be recompressed, maybe, I don't know. And then the vehicle goes in there, then gets refilled. Or if we just get an electric car, keep in mind, electricity is a prerequisite for making hydrogen. You can just use that electricity to charge your EV. So I think it's just, when you look at the supply chain of hydrogen, you're just like, what the heck? It just doesn't make a lot of sense.
And I think I'm going to pass out some of that hydrogen stuff there. I totally agree. basically three types of hydrogen that we see, coming. One is electrolysis, as you said, from electricity, and that's if the electricity is green, that's generally called green hydrogen. The second main one is, as you said, when you use the process to reform natural gas to make hydrogen. Fairly emissions intensive. Some people talk about using CCS to make blue stuff. Blue doesn't really work, but yeah, sure. It's if you have a look at it, slightly cleaner than running a diesel or gas vehicle. If you use steam reform methane to make hydrogen. Then the last one, people don't talk a lot about this one. It's hydrogen that comes off coal plants. Now, that runs you about 3x the emissions of a diesel vehicle, maybe 4x. Like that. So, and I'm going to go a little further again. When you do both the reforming off gas and coal, are pretty dirty, so you got to clean it up. So there's a lot of process in there to clean it up. Because if you stick that straight into a fuel cell, it destroys it very, very quickly. So you got to clean it right up, get all the impurities out before you take the next step to put into a hydrogen tank for a vehicle.
Interesting. And that's the thing, because like with an EV, it's like if you have your own house and you can afford home solar, it's like you can have your solar panel on the roof of your house and your electric car can be right there. Your whole supply chain for getting energy for your car is literally in your house. And that's the really cool thing about EVs. But yeah, and I think I'm not trying to defend. Well, I mean, I guess I'm kind of defending hydrogen in this one circumstance. But when you mention coal, is that assuming like the coal plant's already running and then this can be like an added benefit as you just collect the hydrogen that's coming out of the emissions from that? Or is this more of a thing that you will need to build an actual coal plant for this exact purpose?
No, it would be generally off coal that's coming off anyway. I don't know the technical details about how they do it, but if you look back through history, UK had what they called town gas. Previous to natural gas, they had this town gas stuff. Basically, more than half of that was off the coal plants.
Okay. Still not clean regardless.
Yeah.
Nasty gear.
I feel like there's much better ways to get energy these days that I definitely think that overall, as an energy mix, it's thankfully getting greener and coal is getting phased out, but it's still a difficult transition, and I think that's the nice thing about battery electric vehicles, though. There's almost like a dual purpose because the core technology is battery, which is a form of energy or electricity storage, which can be used for mobility, but also could be used for storing renewable energy for use in off-peak times, right? Which is a huge balancing problem we have here, and in most places, right?
So I think that's interesting there. What you're talking about battery electric vehicles is that you're storing the energy and you can use it for something else. I personally think it's much more productive to use it for your house. And the reason I say it's more than selling it back to the grid, because obviously there's a wholesale cost in there. If the wholesale price of electricity out there is, I don't know, I'm just picking a number. Let's say it's 8 cents kilowatt hour, or $80 megawatt hour. That's going out to customers at 15, 20 cents a kilowatt hour, if not more, to household or to businesses. So that they have this margin in there for distribution costs and whatever. If you capture that energy and then store it in your car and send it back to your house, you avoid all that wholesale stuff. So that vehicle to house stuff is really, really, that's something that can be a huge benefit to customers.
That's interesting. So you're mentioning using your vehicle for like energy arbitrage almost, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, totally. It's what you want to do.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
Balance it and not sending it back to the grid. So
yeah,
because you don't get as much money for it. So,
and there's lots of efficiency losses, right? Like if you're sending it back through the wires, it's going to lose a little bit of energy trying to send it a long distance.
A little bit, yeah.
So that's a good point. That's a good point. And I think overall it's interesting if we want to talk about like investments, right? Because I think the thing that had held up EVs for a really long time was a business case for the battery technology and all the different chemistries. I think EVs are now, driving a new investment into these different types of chemistries, was it silicon oxide anodes, I think it is, right? And solid state batteries, which people have been talking about for a long time. It's like sort of nuclear fusion versus fuel cell. Fuel cell has been talked about since like the 70s, right? Honestly, I think we should let that die. Although for some reason, Japan keeps on investing into it for whatever reason. I hope that they're going to put that down. But Toyota still seems pretty bullish on a hybrid for now approach, which, it might play off in the short term. I don't know in the long term. I still think battery electric is the way to go. It's not a technological problem. It's more of like a personal consumer psychological problem, right?
Plus there's politics. Plus there's, we saw how politically charged this got, and it need to be politically charged. Like, not just accept it for what it is and compare it. Like, it's not that hard. But anyway,
especially with some really great vehicles hitting, like really great EVs people are making these days. Cadillac, I think, is really putting forward a couple good ones.
Yeah,
and
they got a whole lineup now. They got 4 in their inventory. They got the Escalade, they got the Mystique, the Celeste. No, that's more expensive. And then I forgot all the names. They all ended in E.
That one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's like 340. But they have good options that are really reasonably priced. Like, I think I forgot what the entry level one, but it's based on the Equinox EV platform, and it's like in the $50,000 range, and that's how much their gas powered ones are. And even I think what's even crazier too is like the Equinox EV is actually cheaper with the tax credit than the gas powered one. And yeah, it's insane.
I did want to go down something that you had mentioned, David, was battery technology. And I think that one's particularly interesting. I think as for me, who kind of keeps a watch over the industry, I always hear like, oh, there's a new battery technology. It's this, it's solid state, or it's, it's something else. It's sulfur something, or it's salt, or it's whatever. New NMC process that they're, I don't know, jumping up and down, and I think really is showing is that seeing a bunch of different batteries that are being really made for purpose. Whether that's they could be really heavy, like a sulfur battery, but they're not going anywhere. They're sitting on the ground and they're being used as storage. That is great. But we're also seeing right on the other end, the need for ultra-light, ultra-dense batteries for things like we also things even in racing, we're seeing this. So what we're seeing is the batteries that are really expanding, particularly for that. And I think when you have a look at, solid state, whether that's QuantumScape, whether that's, whether it's whoever else is out there, this is another edition of being made for this, type of purpose. It's likely that solid state is going to be fairly expensive to come out with. So, we may actually just see it in fairly high-end cars to start with, or maybe not at all. Maybe we just see it in planes. So I think it's this greater of what batteries are doing and the continued cost reductions that is really opening this landscape up.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can see so many different applications, like certain chemistries. I'm not sure all of them off the top of my head, but some chemistries are good for maybe battery energy storage applications versus like maybe the cells are heavier, etc. But maybe they have higher energy density. And those will be better for like battery energy storage applications versus some lighter weight cells that might be better for EVs. So,
it'd be interesting to take this conversation towards, I think we like to talk about the myths and a lot of the sort of back and forth that we hear a lot when we talk about EV adoption and we sort of are EV advocates. I think one worthwhile for us to talk about is the battery life cycle and what happens to the batteries when they don't become useful for, say, cars anymore. I don't think Rivian's been around long enough for them to have second lives as stationary energy storage, but I know they've talked about it as part of like the purpose and the intent. I think Tesla is sort of a similar way. But it'd be good to hear your thoughts on it, James, in terms of, as we find different uses for all these different batteries, are we also going to become more mature and involved with battery second life and finding other uses for these?
I think the first thing to mention is that battery second life is far from a new concept. Like, hey, we used to, get money for the recycled lead acid batteries that we had in the car, so go in and you get recycled the lead out of it, go in. Um, you know, when Prius started to become very, very popular particularly in California, but, all over North America, we saw a lot of companies that would, grab those batteries, they would refurbish them or they would do something with them and, they would sell them back. So, or they would offer these refurbished replacement batteries as well. You could buy that or you could buy a new one, but, there's a big price differential. This second life battery business has been around for a fair bit. But with the growth of EV, we start to say, well, okay, well, what else is going on? What else can happen? And really people have said, and this is the different bit, is like, crap, we could use this battery for something else. We can, use it as stationary storage. We can do whatever. If the battery is fine. If it's not, you got to recycle it. And recycling of batteries has been around for a while. Obviously, if you're trying to recycle packs and you're trying to recycle lithium ion types, and there's many different types, whether it's prismatic or pouch or whatever, there are processes to be able to do that. So, we have companies like Leacycle, we have Redwood, others out there that are saying, yep, let's bring it in. We're going to recycle it. And those metals, because really those metals are, and in there is very, very concentrated. So you can pull that lithium out much, much easier than if you go and mine it.
I forgot what the company was, but I saw this video on YouTube and it was basically showing the recycling process. And it was in Arizona. I can't think of the company name, but it was really cool because they'd show like literally any type of lithium ion battery, whether it's from a Tesla or from even a phone or even like power equipment for like yard work. And so some of these batteries were like even in like plastic cases and they put it in this liquid, but they wouldn't tell you what the liquid is, but they just told you that separates everything out. So I would assume it's definitely some proprietary technology. And it's pretty cool when you saw at the end how they had big bag of cobalt here, big bag of lithium here, and then another bag of just like metal scrapings. So
right,
that's definitely, I could see that being a big industry in the next decade or so.
Totally. And I mean, there's different processes that different companies have that, they'll probably be a bit proprietary and have patents on. Some will use chemical, which sounds like that. Others will use heat, which I believe is a Redwood way of doing it. So, it's definitely a good thing. And the good thing about chemistry is you can do different things different ways. So
for sure. And so as we're kind of beginning to wrap up this conversation, just being cognizant of the time frame, I want to kind of ask you about just the industry as a whole right now, because there is so much happening right now, whether it's the election, whether it's the rise of China's dominance in the sector, lots going on here, so much going on in the sector. But what do you think do you have like, what are some of your big insights you've gained right now that you think is going to happen in the industry and stuff that we should be looking out for?
Election, I think the thing that I wrote on social media was, it's going to be all right, kids. Like, we're going to be okay. And a couple of reasons I say that. Is, I think under Harris, if the Harris government had got in, yeah, I think this industry would have just taken off like a rocket. Still, a lot of investment, both from Canadian and the US government so far into EVs. And I don't think that that's just going to go away. And especially the automotive companies have done exactly the same. And they're going to want to sell those vehicles just simply to get a return on the capital that they've spent. So those vehicles are going to keep going out. Will there be a reduction in incentives that are out there? Maybe, probably. We don't know. We have to wait and see. Certainly that indicated that might happen. One of the interesting things that's really important to remember is we have these continual drop in price from raw material, both raw materials and battery prices, so that we're going to get to a point, just like we talked about with the Equinox, that have a look at it on a showroom basis, these cars are going to be fairly similar in price. You know what? Maybe the EV is a little bit more money, but hey, you're going to save that money in a couple of years. because you don't have to pay for gas anymore. Like, I know for myself that I'm paying what, $30 a month Canadian to run my car. Fun. I know my friend Paul Martin, who you guys might know too. He's on the ultra low tariff here, and that's probably closer to $5 a month. So, pocket change that we're spending to run our cars, and because of that, even if there's an EV premium, I don't see that for being a problem, for people to move forward, particularly if people and I wrote about this for one of my clients being SK Innovation, who's one of the world's biggest battery companies, and in cars like F-150 and Hyundai Ioniq 5. And I said, look, get to a point sooner rather than later where if you ain't got much money to spend on a new car, you're going to get an EV. Because even if it's the same price as the gas car, you're saving so much money. And I think that's the thing that we got to remember is this: we're going down the path of being a value for money proposition, as well as a great for the environment, as well as a better car to drive. So I think that's the thing that we need to take away and remember.
Definitely. And even on like the better to drive front, I think that's a huge thing that gets a lot of people into EVs, because it's like, even if the EV is more money, just even ignoring price or like cost savings down the road, it's like, just if you look at the vehicle, it's like you can't really compare like a Kia EV9 versus like a Kia Telluride in terms of like driving experience. One of them is going to be super smooth. Or even like if we look at Ford, you got the Ford Edge, which I've driven one. It's not it's bad compared to like the Mach-E. Yeah, it like just like lurchy transmission, like not great. But then you get in like a Ford Mach-E and it's just like, this is quiet, this is smooth, this is nice. And it's like, just having someone experience those two back to back, I don't think anyone would feel bad paying more money for the Mach-E in that circumstance. And now the Mach-E is actually cheaper than the Edge. So I don't know. It's very exciting times.
That experience thing is super important to get people into looking at and driving EVs, because it's really daylight and dark, and it's the experience that I had, 8 or 9 years ago when I first drove an EV too. So, the right entry.
Definitely.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, I appreciate it. I think I have a very similar optimistic view. It's going to be okay. It's just a superior product that's going to provide more value to people, and more people will see it over time. We do need to fix a couple things though as an industry. I still think charging is a bit of a gap if you don't own a Tesla. It has a ways to go. It will get there though. It's just going to take some time and a little bit more money, but we'll get there. Yeah.
And there's technologies that are coming out now for those chargers that are going to make them more reliable. And we're having some regulations that are coming in different parts of the world, which are enforcing that, they need to be X amount reliable. So, all of those things are good things.
Absolutely.
%. All right. Well, I think that wraps up our podcast today. James, thank you very much for joining. I think we had a great conversation and got to talk about so much going on, including hydrogen and everything. So thank you very much for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was a great conversation, and can't wait for it to come out.